Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It's a chilly day here in suburban Chicago. The sun is kind of behind that thin, hazy cloud cover that makes it look like a smear of bright white in the sky rather than, a circle, demonstrably yellow or anything like it. So, and there's a chilly breeze. So if I sound a little cold today, it's because I am. I should have worn the next heavier jacket, but the temperature for the day is actually relatively high. So it's a weird middle ground. Anyhow, so I was thinking about what I might talk about today, and I looked back and I realized I never got around to talking about the fourth quarter of my reading of 2022. So that's what I'm going to do today. It's a reading update. I don't know what that song is. Reading update. Anyway, I thought I would talk a little bit about the books that I read in the last quarter of 2022 from October 1st to December 31st. And then with each book that I read, I'm going to talk a little bit about some gameplay that might go well with them if you're so inclined. So I have like 4 or 5 things to talk about. We'll start with some comics. I read 4 different comics. And when I say a comic, generally I'm talking about a trade paperback here or a graphic novel. It's been a long time since I read single issue comics, and I wouldn't count those as separate books. So I read Deadpool Volume 1 from Daniel Way. There are, of course, lots of different Deadpool Volume 1, but this was the beginning of the mid-2000s run, I think, of Deadpool. And it was fine. I don't think I'm going to read any more of it, but, it gave me a sense of what that character's like in comics. I had read some Deadpool a long time ago, particularly stuff written by stand-up comedian Brian something. I can't remember his last name. I also read Runaways Volume 4 by Brian Vaughan. I could not tell before I read it that it was Volume 4 of a run, so I found it pretty inscrutable, which is a bummer because I think it would probably be a comic I would enjoy, but I didn't enjoy that, and I have enough to read without going back and figuring that out, so no thank you to that one. But I did, however, enjoy Volumes 1 and 2 of Harrow County by Cullen Bunn. I chose to read that because there was a Kickstarter for a game based on Harrow County from Seng-Fung Lim and one of their design partners. They're the same people who made Mind Management, and that is a game that's gotten a lot of really positive buzz. So I wanted to check out Harrow County, and it's a really neat idea. The premise is there's this town where there's lots of ghosts and other ne'er-do-wells that kind of lurk in the dark, and it's in Appalachia, and they refer to all of these ne'er-do-wells, these monsters and whatnots, as haints, like haunts, only haints. And the character is a young girl, she's like 13, 14, something like that, who finds herself sort of menaced by these ghosts, and then discovers that the townspeople are after her because of her heritage. I don't want to say more about it than that, but it's delightfully creepy, delightfully weird also, though, not entirely where it doesn't go where you think it's going to necessarily, and very well drawn, super creepy. The art is not as scratchy as the art from like 30 Days of Night or Criminal Macabre, and that's Ben Templesmith is the artist for those. I don't remember the name of the artist for Harrow County. It's a little more engaged than that, but it does have some aspects of that creepy color tones and a little bit of a jagged feel to it. So yeah, I really like Harrow County Volumes 1 and 2. At some point I may read more of it from the library. I wasn't so obsessed that I went and immediately got more of it, but a really interesting read there. If you wanted to play something that went with that, obviously you could get the Harrow County game from Kickstarter, but you couldn't play that today. I feel like there's a number of games that engage with the kind of town versus the witch idea. You know, there's The Witch of Salem is a famous one. That's probably the one I would suggest. You could also go with Touch of Evil is another one one of my go-tos for anything having to do with the country. Of course, Harrow County takes place in a contemporary time, not in an old-timey time, but otherwise, it's pretty good. I'm reminded, actually, Harrow County reminded me a lot of Autumnal, both in like color tone, but also like what the town was like. That comic also had this sort of notion of like malevolent nature, and that's there. So perhaps, you know, maybe one of the answers here would be the second edition of Horrified, or the Horrified sequel, American Cryptids, which deals with monsters that are sort of like the Haints in Harrow County. So yeah, I'll say Horrified American Cryptids would be the gameplay accompaniment. In the last quarter of 2022, I did return to a couple series that I've been reading. I read the next volume of the Roger Zelazny Nine Princes in Amber books. I read Sign of the Unicorn. It was fine, pretty unmemorable. Honestly, I barely remember the plot of it, but my consistent experience with it is whenever I read one of the novels, and that's maybe the fourth one, I feel like my GM, who runs my every other week Amber role-playing game, is doing a fantastic job of making the game feel like the novels. So that's pretty exciting, because this one in particular, as I was reading it, I was like, oh man, this is exactly like something that would happen in the game. And which was, that's really fun. I will say these novels show their age. They're pretty sexist. Zelazny's a very good writer, but there's a limitation to what's going on in the text in terms of accessibility, or I don't know what word you'd put to it. That said, it was enjoyable, and I'm happy to read it. I got to say the thing you should play with it is the Amber role-playing game, and that's available on DriveThruRPG if you wanted to get it. It's not too expensive. You can pick yourself up a PDF copy of the book and learn all about the Nine Princes of Amber. By the way, I read that Stephen Colbert is working on producing an adaptation of the Nine Princes of Amber for television, which is just a wild idea because the show is so unhinged, or the book series is so unhinged in terms of the stuff that happens and the way that we understand what the universe is doing, how the universe works, that there's some of the stuff in there that I just don't know how you put on screen. But they made Doctor Strange. There's a lot of stuff in Doctor Strange that would have been really difficult to conceive of how they put it on screen. So there you go. The other series that I returned to that I haven't read from for a while, and this one actually, it's been a really long time. This is the M.C. Beaton Hamish Macbeth series. Hamish Macbeth is a small town Scottish constable, and he likes living in the very far north of Scotland. And he really likes being a small town constable, but he's also very, very good at his job. And so he's constantly in danger of being promoted. And so he's always kind of trying to work to avoid getting promoted while keeping his job as a PC, but also then exceeding the role of his job by like solving murders. So these books are very predictable. They're very digestible. They're like 120 pages, so they read in like 4 hours or something, maybe 3 hours, maybe 180 pages. So 4 hours, but really good. Not really good. They're good. The one I read was Death of a Village. This one was interesting because the premise is this one of the local villages that is sort of part of Hamish's wider constabulary domain. Everybody in the village is just kind of turned into a jerk, and they won't talk to people. And it's really interesting to sort of see what's going on in this town and how Hamish has to try to figure out what's going on. So solid and interesting book. I enjoyed it. I'm going to read probably 1 or 2 of those a year. I actually checked the other one out from the library right now. So tune back in 3 months for the Q1 of 2023 reading report. As for what you'd play to go along with it, honestly, Clue or Sleuth. Sleuth might be a good one. I haven't played that myself, but it's a Sid Sackson game it's a mystery game, but it's like all the trappings of Clue with a lot of the ugly corners shaved off, is how I understand it. And that seems to fit pretty well. So yeah, we'll say that. I got 2 things left to share. I read Rabbits by Terry Miles. Now, Rabbits is a book about a alternate reality game sort of shared universe alternate reality stories where there is a mysterious game called Rabbits that is played, and finding a way to play the game is part of the challenge of the game. And the people who play the game are in it. Some people who play the game have died, and it's all mysterious and blah, blah, blah. And of course, in the novel, then it turns out that it is real, and the main character gets swept up in the game. Or do they? Or is it? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, a delightful book. I didn't know anything about the podcast. There's a podcast that the book sort of draws on or comes from. And I don't know whether the podcast is, in fact, kind of the story of the same story, and this is translated in a podcast form, or if the story is actually about the game, which I don't think is real. I presume not. It reminds me a little bit of SCP, which is a constellation of online storytelling tropes that people use to create this kind of shared narrative space where they can tell stories that aren't real, but buy into this kind of fantasy secondary level. Sort of like an alternate reality game without a set of cloud makers running the whole thing. Maybe. Or maybe there really is a game. I don't know. The story of the novel was pretty fun, and I enjoyed it. Now, if you're going to play a board game about this, I think it's Steve Jackson's Illuminati, right? That's a game all about conspiracies and secret organizations and people not knowing who's part of what. It's got to be that. I haven't played that game in a really long time, but it feels like Illuminati would be the game to play if you were going to try to play a game about this sort of thing. Or if you're going to do role-playing, Paranoia, even though that's a sci-fi future game, a key part of Paranoia is the idea that you are part of a secret society. And everybody in the game, one of the things you get from the GM is which secret society you're in. And of course, in the world of Paranoia, it's illegal to be in a secret society. So everybody's in one, and it's illegal to be in them at all. So that's a fun part of that game. All right, I read a self-published novel called Soul Wizard. It was fine. Not really a lot to say about that, but I'm just letting you know all the things I read. And then finally, I read two novels. One, and then like a month later, I read the second one. These are two novels by Brandon Sanderson about a world where superheroes emerge, and much like The Boys or The Authority, it turns out the superheroes are unaccountable to regular people and not always moral. Particularly The Boys is about that. And in Steelheart, which is the first one, it turned the superheroes become tyrants. They become like warlords, and Steelheart takes over Chicago. And if you live in Chicago, you are one of Steelheart's citizens. He kills anybody who messes with him or whatever. Then in the second book, there's a sequel called Firefight, and that one takes place in New York, I think, as I recall, and follows a similar pattern of battles against different superheroes. Now, there is a third one called Calamity. I returned that book to the library without reading it. I would like to check it out again at some point to finish up. I thought these books were fine. I didn't think they were amazing, but it's a compelling story, and I'm interested to know what happens in the third book, even if I'm not that compelled by the story itself. So that's kind of where I am with Steelheart and Firefight. Obviously, the game to play, if you're interested in thinking about Steelheart and Firefight as a game, or being accompanied by a game, would be The Reckoners, which is a game based on the Brandon Sanderson novels. So obviously that's what you should play if you're interested in this. I did play The Reckoners, which is what led me to read these books in the first place. So round and round we go. Brandon Sanderson knows where we stop. So that is my reading from Q4 of 2022. What did you read in that time? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and share your thoughts about that. I look forward to hearing it, or reading it, I guess, and seeing if we have some matchups. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.